Hello, folks. I'm Josh McGee, and welcome to another episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, very excited for another brand new episode this week as the calendar flips from March to April. We're coming off of a very busy week of international fixtures. It's an exciting time this weekend as players return to their clubs for the final part of their seasons, while we also are just a couple weeks away from the American soccer teams here getting started with their regular season. So it's going to be a very jam-packed episode. Got another great guest, great interview for you all this week. As you look at here in the home studio, of course, since it is opening day this week, I had to put up one of my St. Louis Cardinals soccer night jerseys in honor of them. And over here on this shoulder, brand new addition to the wall, the Italian national team home jersey for the upcoming Euros this summer. Just a beautiful looking jersey. That dark blue really looks good on them. And again, very excited for the Euros coming up here. Man, we're just a couple months away from that huge tournament kicking off. So again, very excited for this episode. But of course, as you can kind of see, I'm kind of secretly wearing the United States men's national team shirt. And of course, I'm kind of doing that in shame because of this past week, what has happened with them. That's where we got to start. That's where everyone's been talking about. So of course, that's what we have to highlight on the show. And I have to start off by making this point. The beauty of sports and covering sports is its unpredictability. You never know what's going to happen. That's why you got to go out and play the games. When it comes to making predictions or analyzing sports, it'd be pretty boring if myself or everybody else was always right all the time. You want to put yourself out there from time to time. But sometimes even the mildest of takes can be shut down pretty quickly. On last week's show, I preached patience with the U.S. men's national team ahead of an important week of fixtures for the senior team and for the under-23s. Nowadays, if I tried preaching patience, that would pretty much fall on deaf ears. It's a good thing that I'm doing this by myself from my home studio, where I probably have, a couple hundred angry voices shouting me down. Now, while the senior team showed positive signs this week in their victories over Jamaica and Northern Ireland, that positivity was quickly replaced with anger when the U.S. under-23s lost to Honduras 2-1 to fail to qualify for the Olympics for the third straight attempt. It wasn't even really just about the loss. It was the way the U.S. lost this match. They just looked lifeless and incoherent for most of it. A couple of mistakes led to the Honduras goals, including a huge gaffe by goalkeeper David Ochoa. The only real bright spot during this tournament and in this match was Captain Jackson Ewell, who had that beautiful strike to get the U.S. back into it. He had some great play. Of course, he's featured the U.S. men's national team a couple of times. Could be a good-looking prospect that could make a potential World Cup qualifier team. As for the rest of the players, especially after this match, not so much in terms of positive things going forward. The result, of course, brought about swift and justified anger that the U.S. at such a high level once again fell short despite the wealth of resources at its disposal. You had the regulars, Taylor Twellman, Alexi Lalas, several other talking heads voicing their frustration, voicing their anger. I'm going to kind of break down the varying levels of that anger, but there should be some, right? We should have gotten this done. We had the resources, we had the talent, even with the guys that we had there at the time, to get this done, to at least win this particular match, not the next one, but just this one, and to qualify for the Olympics. Now, while this team was capable and should have qualified for the Olympics, the truth is that wealth of resources wasn't all available, and that this loss shone a big spotlight on the disconnect within U.S. soccer. Let's start with this, right? The U.S. Soccer Federation made qualifying for the Olympics a priority this time, especially after failing the past two attempts, but from coaching to team selection and everything in between, it just didn't seem like they were actually making it a priority. That's really been the case on the men's side when it comes to Olympic qualifying over these past few years, right? Obviously, with the women, they've been knocking it out of the park. But on the men's side, with this kind of under-23 requirement, it just seems like that has been sort of an excuse for U.S. soccer to not take this competition as seriously. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for these guys, but I did see a lot of people talking about the fact that there were a lot of under-23 type players playing for the senior national team on the day. Why weren't they with this Olympic team? Of course, that has a lot to do with European clubs not willing to release their players for an age-specific tournament. They want them playing for the senior national team. So that's why you saw your Christian Pulisic, your Gio Reynas, etc., playing for the first, the senior national team instead of this team. However, I did find it very surprising that certain MLS clubs withheld eligible players for this tournament. I know their season is coming up, but they still would have had a couple of weeks between the finish of Olympic qualifying and the start of the MLS regular season in terms of, recovering and getting ready for the season. So that was a little bit shocking that those two, MLS and U.S. soccer, haven't been working together. Of course, what made matters worse was the awkwardness in scheduling. Having a senior national team friendly being played on the same day that the under-23s were in the midst of Olympic qualifying. While you have several high-profile under-23 players playing for the national team, it just is a really bad look, and it really compounded the result. So when it comes to the anger over this result, I definitely think that there are two sides to this issue. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, outside of one or two possibilities, I don't think any of these guys are going to be sniffing the national team roster when World Cup qualifying comes around. U.S. Soccer already has a deep talent pool to choose from. And honestly, don't you want all those guys playing together as much as possible to help build up that chemistry for when the qualifiers start up? I think that's more value of building that up than dropping a few guys down to an Olympic roster, playing with guys that they're probably not going to be playing with, at least for a very long time, just to get into this tournament in terms of developing those players and getting them ready for qualifiers and for the World Cup next year. I definitely think that's more important. However, in terms of these players, long-term projects, developing them, getting them some important matches to play with, building up that chemistry for when that group eventually rises up to the national team, this was definitely a missed opportunity for them to continue that development. In the long run, I think that failure to qualify for this Olympics is more of an embarrassment than a detriment to the progress of the U.S. men's national team, but this is becoming all too familiar of an occurrence, right? The U.S. have found a way to crash out of the past few major tournaments they've been a part of at all levels, and they've been doing it to opponents they have no business losing to. These guys, they're not minnows, okay? The U.S. under-23s are right below the senior national team. We have to start taking this stuff seriously. We can't get all mad about these types of results, say that we're going to change, and then they keep happening. Something's got to happen. I definitely think that this loss showcased the disconnect within U.S. soccer, between federation, between MLS, between the youth system, everything involved. Everyone's got to get on the same page. It's going to take everybody involved in the future to make sure that this does not happen, especially on a bigger stage. Okay, so there was plenty of drama during this international break outside of the U.S., and I want to kind of highlight some of the matches and results that went down for you all from some of the other different World Cup qualifiers that were going on. Of course, I want to start off with UEFA. I want to start with Group A. There was a big match between Portugal and Serbia, who after their few matches during this break are tied on points at the top of Group A. Those two battled to a 2-2 draw, but there was a lot of controversy involved with the finish. It looked like Portugal had scored the winner in stoppage time through Cristiano Ronaldo. Replays showed that the ball did in fact cross the line, but because there's no VAR or goal line technology involved during UEFA World Cup qualifiers, the goal was not given, and the match finished in a 2-2 draw. If you saw the highlights, Ronaldo, he stormed off the pitch. He threw down his captain's armband. He threw a fit. I don't condone all of what he did, but I definitely understand his anger. It was clear as day. The ball was over the line, and this was such an important match. We shouldn't be having these instances still in World Cup qualifying. The VAR should have been implemented. This should have been a given goal, and it's a huge result because these two are going to be battling out at the top of the group for the entirety of qualifiers. And of course, as we know, only first place is guaranteed a spot in the World Cup. Second place goes to a playoff. So this result could be huge going forward in terms of how the rest of that group plays out. Just again, another unfortunate occurrence of something that shouldn't be happening at this level of international soccer. As far as other top teams that stood out to me during this international break, let's start with these guys, the Italian national team. They won all three of their matches without conceding a goal. Seems like the old Italian defense is back. Of course, they've kind of gone over a renaissance, pardon the pun, over these past few years with a different group of players. They've ushered out that old guard. They've brought in a couple of different young new players, and it seems to be working right now. They've got a relatively easy group. They should be qualifying on top, but it's interesting to see how much of a player they are going forward when it comes to the World Cup. Another team that impressed me over this past week was definitely England. England also found a way to win all three of their matches, and they got a really big win in their last match. It was a 2-1 victory over Poland. Harry Maguire scored the game-winning goal late, but still, that was the only goal they conceded during their three matches. I believe they scored 9 goals in total. Right now, in my opinion, this is the deepest crop of players that England has had to choose from in the past few years. So again, very exciting going forward to see what they can do. If they can qualify at the top of this group, Poland will give them a little bit of a challenge down the stretch here, but they should do it. And again, looking forward ahead, I think they can be a major player at next year's World Cup. A couple of top teams that weren't as impressive, still got the job done, but still were a little bit shaky, I think were Spain and France. Both those teams were held in their first match. They each drew versus inferior opponents. Spain drew against Greece. France drew against Ukraine. They won their other two matches, but they were by very slim results. Of course, France, again, the reigning champions, they still have that incredible amount of talent that they can choose from. Just didn't really seem to get things going. Obviously, they kept things low on the defensive end, but with all that talent, they should be scoring plenty of different goals. As for Spain, much like Italy, a lot of their players have gone in and out throughout the years. They're trying to bring in a lot of young new players. So again, they were eventually able to get it done in their last 2 matches, but again, weren't as dominant as you're used to expected from Spain. So I'm sure both those teams will qualify, but it's just interesting to see right now how they're doing, what players they're trying to get into their system, and what they're going to look like here in the future. But of course, the biggest and most shocking result from the past week of UEFA World Cup qualifiers has to deal with the German national team. For the first time in 20 years, and only the 3rd time in their country's history, Germany lost a World Cup qualifier match. Even more shocking, it was the tiny country of North Macedonia who did it, winning the match 2-1 on an 85th minute winner. This was just an amazing thing. Basically, March Madness coming to life here in UEFA World Cup qualifiers. Macedonia got on top early 1-0, but Nikolai Gundogan penalty leveled the score. But of course, like I said, a late 85th minute winner was able to seal it for North Macedonia. Germany, of course, dominated the match. I think they had over 70% of possession. They created some chances, but they weren't able to put them away. Timo Werner, my goodness. If you haven't seen the Miss folks, go look it up. Just abysmal. He is in his own head at the moment. One of the most out-of-form strikers in all of the world. Just embarrassing. I know his coach, Joachim Löw, really slammed him after the match for missing that chance. But again, it just kind of goes to show some of the problems right now with the German national team. It's full of young players, but some of those young players are just not on form as of the moment. Still, that defense should not be letting up 2 goals to North Macedonia, but credit to them for being adventurous. Biggest win in that country's history overall. Again, it's just something real cool to see. Germany, they're going to qualify for the World Cup. Don't worry about that. But still, this could be a huge moment for Macedonia, who could, rise up and maybe try to get that playoff spot in that group. Still, just something really cool to see for that country. Kind of just goes to show why Joachim Löw is leaving and the problems right now with the German national team trying to get that new group of young players in. But still, fantastic result, really cool to see. And yeah, just once again, another great aspect of the beautiful game. Now, of course, there are other World Cup qualifiers going around across all the other continents in the world, but I do want to focus, of course, at home here on CONCACAF. Now, remember, not all of the CONCACAF teams are participating in this round of World Cup qualifying. Of course, you saw, the likes of the U.S. and Mexico playing friendlies during this time, but I did want to focus on a few teams that people would recognize who could be advancing to the next round here. So for the first couple of matches through CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers, you had the likes of Canada, Guatemala, Panama, and the Dominican Republic win both their matches. Canada were extremely impressive. I believe they tallied 16 goals in the couple of matches that they played. Also interesting to note, Panama and the Dominican Republic in the same group. In terms of qualifying for the next round, only the top team in each group will advance. So that's extremely important for that group. A couple other teams, El Salvador and Trinidad and Tobago, a couple of teams that we're used to seeing, sort of compete in World Cup qualifying. They won 1 match and they drew 1. So a little bit behind the 8 ball, but not too much. I still expect both teams to find a way to qualify for the next round. But still, interesting to see these initial results. Again, of course, they'll be moving on to the second round. I'm not sure, again, if the full slate of teams will be available at that point. I believe the U.S. and Mexico and some of those other teams will be moving into the third round. That's when they'll get going. But still, again, just interesting to see going forward which teams will come out of qualifying, potential opponents for the U.S. and Mexico and others in CONCACAF who they'll be facing in World Cup qualifiers. So like I said earlier, club soccer returns this weekend as we head into the home stretch of these seasons. A lot of high-profile matches are on the docket, so kind of wanted to give a little bit of a refresher course as to where we stand with each of the big 5 leagues. It seems like forever ago that they were in action. So let's start with the English Premier League. I'm going to start at the top with Manchester City. Of course, they hold a 14-point lead over Manchester United at the top of the EPL table, but they had to deliver some tough news from this past week when they announced that longtime striker Sergio Aguero will not be returning to the club after his contract expires this summer. Aguero, of course, is a club legend. He's their all-time leading goal scorer with 257 goals in 384 appearances. None more famous than that goal versus QPR that helped clinch their first ever EPL title. Just a tremendous career at City for Aguero. It's amazing to think how good he was at Atletico Madrid. And of course, he joins Manchester City as a part of that first wave with the likes of David Silva and Yaya Toure. And of course, he just built himself into one of the best strikers in the world at the time. Again, tremendous send-off. He's getting a statue outside of the Etihad Stadium, well-deserved. So it'll be tough to see him leave, but he'll have plenty of options, maybe even link up with his buddy Lionel Messi. wherever Messi is next season. But still, tremendous career for Aguero. He's going to go out as another EPL champion here this season. As for the actual competition left in the English Premier League this season, that has to do with the remaining Champions League spots. Second place through sixth place in the table are separated by just 9 points as we hit this pivotal part in the season. We've got Manchester United, Leicester City, Chelsea, West Ham United even, and Liverpool, as well as maybe Spurs and Arsenal battling it out for these final 2 spots. Some pivotal matches that play a part in those races this weekend. You've got Leicester City having to host Manchester City. That'll be an extremely tough matchup for them. And you've got Arsenal hosting Liverpool, who are trying to bounce back and make a late push for a Champions League spot. It'll be interesting to see who can hold on. My money is that Manchester United will find a way to qualify probably in second place and take one of those spots. But those other 2 spots are up for grabs. Leicester City, a little bit of a smaller club. Jamie Vardy hasn't been in quite as good of form this season. You've got Chelsea and some of maybe their inconsistency still in terms of scoring goals. Liverpool have had their problems. Spurs have hit a rut. It'll be a pretty good race here for those last few Champions League spots in the English Premier League. And lastly, of course, in terms of the relegation battle at the bottom of the EPL table, it sure looks like Sheffield United and West Brom have already sealed their fate and will be relegated after this season. But Fulham, who currently right now occupy the last relegation spot, have improved over recent weeks. I think they're definitely going to be battling it out with the likes of Newcastle, Brighton, and Burnley for that final relegation spot. Offensively, they've been able to put in a pretty good amount of goals and have shored things up a little bit on the defensive end. Still worried about that side of the ball for Fulham, but you've got other clubs like Newcastle and Brighton who've struggled to put matches away and have left a lot of points on the table. Should be an interesting little battle. I wouldn't count any of those clubs out of it at the moment, but like I said, Sheffield, West Brom can't score enough, let in too many goals. They have already sealed their fate. But for that last spot, should be an interesting and albeit entertaining for the neutral fans, of course, battle for relegation at the end of the season. Now let's pivot over to La Liga, talk about the 3-team race for the title in Spain. Atletico Madrid are still at the top of the table despite a severe dip in form in recent weeks. They held a 4-point lead over Barcelona and a 6-point lead over rivals Real Madrid. They've got a tough task this weekend. Atletico have to travel to 4th place Sevilla FC. However, their rivals, Real Madrid, were delivered a huge blow this week when it turns out that during international duty with Spain, Sergio Ramos picked up an injury to his calf and will miss the upcoming El Clasico match versus Barcelona, as well as the Champions League tie versus Liverpool in terms of that tournament, what that could do for Real Madrid. We've seen how bad their defenses look without Ramos in the lineup. Of course, he'll miss maybe 1 or 2 other matches in La Liga. So that's a huge blow for Real and their title hopes, as well as their Champions League hopes versus Liverpool. So we'll have to see how they deal with that injury. Atletico, can they get out of the rut that they entered the international break in? And then Barcelona, we know they've been extremely inconsistent over the course of the season, but they've found a way to battle back near to the top of the La Liga table. Can they take advantage of these 2 other clubs and what they're having to deal with? So again, another 3-horse race for the title in Spain. Should be a good finish to the season. Next up, going to focus on the German Bundesliga, and I have to start off with yet another major injury to a star player, and that would be Bayern Munich striker Robert Lewandowski, who has been ruled out for the next month due to a sprained ligament in his right knee that he picked up last Sunday in Poland's match versus Andorra. Lewandowski, who was on pace to break the all-time single-season goal-scoring record in the Bundesliga, will instead miss this weekend's pivotal clash versus second-place RB Leipzig, as well as Bayern Munich's Champions League tie versus PSG. So again, Robert Lewandowski, probably the best striker in the world at the moment, out for the next month. Bayern have yet to put away the German Bundesliga title, and if they drop points this weekend, especially if they lose to RB Leipzig, maybe there's a chance that they could drop the Bundesliga title altogether now that Lewandowski will be out for a while. Of course, his injury matters more in that Champions League matchup versus PSG, but still, we'll have to see how Bayern adjusts. Of course, they've got plenty of talent on that team to make adjustments, but still, it's going to be a little bit different now that they don't have their main talisman up front leading the line. So again, another huge injury with several different implications, but it's possible they could open the door to the likes of Leipzig in the German Bundesliga. Elsewhere in the Bundesliga table, we've seen over the past few weeks just how great Erling Haaland, Jadon Sancho, and the rest of Borussia Dortmund have been in the Champions League. However, they are in a dogfight in the Bundesliga. They are on the outside looking in when it comes to qualifying for next year's Champions League. However, they've got a big match this weekend. They take on Eintracht Frankfurt, who is ahead of them in 4th place by 4 points. A win would close the gap there to obviously 1 point and would keep Dortmund in contention for a Champions League spot next year. They're most likely not going to win this current tournament, so it'd be good on them to try to qualify in the Bundesliga. Again, it's been their defensive issues. They've got to find a way to stop conceding goals. But as long as Haaland is on form, they should be able to find a way to overcome Frankfurt and some of the other teams in that table and qualify for next year's Champions League. But still, big match this week for Dortmund. I know they're obviously a fan favorite with what Haaland and co have been doing. But we'll have to see. If they drop points here this weekend, could be a tough challenge for them to qualify for the Champions League. And lastly, in terms of the bottom of the Bundesliga table, outside of Schalke, it's pretty crowded down there as teams try to avoid relegation and the relegation playoff. Definitely hoping that Native St. Louis and Josh Sargent and Werder Bremen avoid that fate this season. But I did want to highlight Schalke, who are most likely going down after this season. They're a pretty big club and have been pretty successful over the years. To see them this low, barely any wins this season, tremendous disappointment. Hoping they come right back up. I'm going to miss those derby matchups versus Borussia Dortmund next season. But still, in terms of the other spots, it's kind of crowded, hoping that things play out well for the clubs that people have really interest in, and that especially Werder Bremen can avoid relegation next season. Next up, Serie A, where everybody is chasing Inter Milan, who currently hold a 6-point lead at the top of the table in Italy over their rivals AC Milan, having not lost a match since January. I know to begin the season, it was AC Milan who had that tremendous unbeaten run, but lately it's been Inter, what they've been able to do on the defensive end under manager Antonio Conte. And of course, the dynamic duo up top, Romelu Lukaku and Lautaro Martinez, have been getting it done and putting in the goals. So don't know if Inter are going to relinquish that lead. 6 points, obviously that's just a couple of results, but they've been in tremendous form. Looks like they will be able to stay consistent enough in order to clinch that Serie A title. In terms of the other Champions League spots in Serie A, much like the English Premier League, there's a lot of teams fighting for those last few spots. Places 3 through 7 in the table are just separated by 6 points. You've got teams like Juventus, Napoli, Atalanta, AS Roma, and Lazio all competing for those last few Champions League spots. A lot of impressive clubs. Of course, some clubs are involved in currently the Europa League right now. Some clubs like Juventus have been eliminated from the Champions League and, of course, have a lot of free time to focus on their Serie A campaign. So it'll be interesting to see who kind of separates themselves from the pack. I think not this weekend, but next week you've got Juventus versus Napoli, I believe. That will be a really huge matchup. So, again, we'll just have to see. It should be a really entertaining finish. Like I said, Serie A has been one of the more competitive leagues across all of Europe this season. So that should lend itself to a really good finish here for this season. And lastly, there's a huge match taking place tomorrow in Ligue 1 in France between PSG and Lille, who head into this clash tied at the top of the table on points. PSG come into this match after an impressive 4-2 victory over third-place Lyon, while Lille have dropped points in 3 of their past 4 matches. This has got to be it for Lille. If they want to win the Ligue 1 title this season, kind of take away the crown that PSG have had for the past few years, they've got to find a way to win this match. Otherwise, PSG are just going to run right over them. Unfortunately, for the rest of the season, they'll find a way with all of the talent that they have to make sure that they don't drop in the table. I know PSG for most of the season have been out of that first place spot. They get the win here. I don't think they're going to relinquish it. Obviously, they are the favorites. They would be my pick, but still, Lille have had a very impressive season. They've found a way in the past to nick points off of PSG. If they're able to do it here, it should make for a very entertaining race to finish up the Ligue 1 season. So that is where we stand with the Big 5 leagues across Europe as club soccer returns this weekend. Of course, here in America, we await the beginning of our season. So let's get into some Soccer America talk. I'm going to start off with MLS and some sad news, unfortunately, that broke this week concerning the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup. The U.S. Soccer Federation announced that due to the ongoing complications from the COVID-19 pandemic, that the first round of the Open Cup had been canceled and that the field has been reduced to 16 teams. Those teams will be 8 from MLS, and they will be joined by the 4 semifinalists from last year's USL Championship playoffs. They'll be joined also by the NISA Fall champions, Detroit City FC, the USL League 1 regular season champions, Greenville Triumph SC, and 2 clubs from open divisions. So this stinks, right? This doesn't really capture the spirit of the Open Cup, advancing these MLS clubs through rounds where they have to play some of the lower level clubs. Doesn't give the opportunity to those lower level clubs just to get into the tournament, much less get to face MLS opposition. In my opinion, they probably should just cancel it altogether. If there are truly complications with the pandemic, you don't want to risk people. So, and with this competition, 16 teams, it just really isn't a real Open Cup. So looking forward to eventually when that tournament gets back to its full capacity. We get those great matchups between the lower level clubs and MLS, possibility upsets, and really capture the spirit of the Open Cup. So I know sometimes something is better than nothing, but I don't think this is one of those times. Next up, more concerning news from this past week. Inter Miami CF announcing that they had to cancel 3 of their preseason matches due to ongoing health and safety protocol concerns. So they haven't really had much of a preseason. They, of course, open their season in just a few weeks versus the LA Galaxy. It's been a weird, again, crazy offseason for Inter Miami. They've got a bunch of stuff going on, some of which that they've caused. But, of course, this ongoing situation with the pandemic, we're not fully through it. Of course, what has been going down in Florida is a tough situation to handle for those clubs. So, again, Miami just being safe. They got a new coach in Phil Neville. Got to be tough that you're not having that many matches to prepare for your first season. We'll have to see how this affects them in the first few months of the season. And lastly, just wanted to highlight a potential transfer here. U.S. men's national team and Fortuna Dusseldorf midfielder Alfredo Morales is currently in discussions with New York City Football Club over a potential transfer this summer when his contract expires. The soon-to-be 31-year-old has played his entire professional career in Germany with also 16 caps to his name with the U.S. men's national team. So a little bit of an interesting transfer here. Morales, of course, like I said, has played his entire career in Germany, but coming over to MLS, maybe getting a few more eyes on him, trying to push his way back in the U.S. men's national team. And of course, NYCFC could definitely use the bodies, especially there in the midfield. He'd be a nice veteran presence that they'd be able to add mid-season. So that's something to keep our eye on in terms of developing here as we get closer to the summer period. Okay, let's talk some women's soccer now. Of course, going to start off with the second leg of the quarterfinals of the Women's UEFA Champions League. Chelsea, Barcelona, and Bayern Munich each qualified for the semifinals this week. Chelsea beat Wolfsburg 3-0 in the second leg, and they got a goal from each of their big three in Pernille Harder, Sam Kerr, and Fran Kirby. Barcelona, a little bit of a scare here in the second leg versus Manchester City. Man City actually beat Barcelona 2-1. Sam Ewis scored a penalty in that match, but it was not enough to overcome that first leg deficit. Barcelona were able to advance on aggregate. And of course, then Bayern Munich were able to comfortably handle Rosengard over their 2 ties. Unfortunately, we don't know the fourth team that is going to be involved in the semifinals because the second leg between PSG and Lyon had to be postponed to a later date due to a couple of positive COVID-19 tests on Lyon's side. Again, really cool to see that rivalry at this point in the Champions League, but we're going to have to wait and see if Lyon can hold on to that 1-0 deficit and move on, or if PSG can cause the upset. But still, no surprises in terms of the 3 clubs that were able to advance to the semifinals, or at least after the first leg. Barcelona were very impressive versus Man City. Bayern Munich, again, comfortably dealt with Rosengard. And Chelsea finally got over the bugaboo of facing against Wolfsburg and were able to beat them this time and advance to the semifinals. So again, 3 teams who are on really good form. They'll be joined by a really good 4th club as well. And we'll have to see how the semifinals plays out. The other big news story in women's soccer that I wanted to highlight happened last weekend, and it concerns U.S. women's national team forward Christian Press, who scored a goal in Manchester United's 2-0 win over 10 women West Ham United. This was a big deal because this match took place at Old Trafford, and it was the first time ever that the women's team got to play at the Theatre of Dreams. A tremendous opportunity for the women's team, and they were able to highlight it with the win. Of course, Press scoring it as well makes it an even bigger deal here in the States, hoping that there are more opportunities for women's clubs, at least, temporarily sometimes, or for a big match that get to play in these huge stadiums. And eventually, once we get fans back in attendance, they'll be able to pack it. I can remember, I think Barcelona versus Atletico Madrid drew a huge crowd at the Camp Nou, at least last season or sometime recently. It'd be really cool, again, to see this kind of be a trend across Europe and across the world, really, and seeing that these women's teams get these opportunities to get big crowds in for these big matches. So it doesn't have to be a regular thing, but it'd be something cool going forward. So again, excellent opportunity. Press scoring at Old Trafford. Really cool moment for the U.S. women's national team forward. And lastly, I want to talk about a couple stories from the USL Championship from the past week, starting off with the league releasing the full schedule for the upcoming 2021 season, with the highlight being the long-anticipated matchup between Phoenix Rising FC and the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Those 2 clubs, of course, were supposed to meet in last year's USL Championship final, but that was postponed due to the pandemic. The league also stated that in terms of releasing details on the structure of the playoff format for the season, that will happen prior to the start of the regular season. So again, we're just a couple weeks away from the start of the USL Championship season. Very excited that we'll be getting a full slate of matches. Each club will be playing 32 matches on their schedule. going to be a lot of great matchups and should be a very entertaining season. The other big news from the league this week was the announcement that the Charlotte Independents were in the process of selling several ownership stakes in the club, including that of owner Dan D'Amico. D'Amico has been under fire over the past year over his anti-Black Lives Matter tweets, as well as his recent anti-Asian posts. This has been a stain on the USL for quite some time. I'm glad that they finally have come up with the solution. This is not how you should be representing a club. I know Charlotte fans have had a tough time dealing with, the MLS club and everything that's going over here on one side and the stuff they've had to deal with the USL Championship clubs. So hopefully removing D'Amico kind of removes a little bit of the stain as to what he has brought to that club, kind of brings some balance to what's been going on there in Charlotte. Hopefully these fans and the players, of course, and the rest of that club can focus on having a good season. Okay, now let's move on to talk some St. Louis soccer news. And of course, got to start off with St. Louis City SC, who made headlines this week when they announced Purina as the club's first founding partner and kit sponsor on Wednesday. CEO Carolyn Kendall Betts was adamant that the club is committed to finding partners who embody the STL Made movement. It was also announced that the club are currently in talks with Adidas over the inaugural kit design. So I'm going to put up some pictures on the screen as I talk about this. Obviously, this is a great move for City SC. Purina, they're an STL Made company. They've built a global brand here in St. Louis. Of course, the pet market is huge. St. Louis is full of pet lovers, and there's so many different, events and promotions that you can do with Purina. I thought it was also really cool that the first founding partner is a company that is led by a female CEO in Nina Leahy Kruger, again, continuing to showcase women in high professional roles and build that partnership with them and the ownership group at St. Louis City SC. So again, this is a really cool announcement. Purina are the first on board. I'm looking forward to see who will join them in terms of being partners with St. Louis City SC. Next up, the St. Louis Ambush were eliminated from the first round of the MASL playoffs by their rivals, the Kansas City Comets, who beat them in Game 1 by a score of 7-4, and then beat them at the Family Arena on Sunday in Game 2 by a score of 6-2. The Ambush finished the season overall with a record of 8-9. So again, good on the Ambush. They were able to make it to the playoffs, but unfortunately they don't get past their rivals in round 1. Again, tough situation this year with all of the pandemic protocols that they've had to get through, some of the teams not completing their seasons. Hopefully things will get back to more of a normal look for next year's season, and hopefully the Ambush can kind of build on some of the momentum they had this year. They had a lot of great stretches where they were able to put together some wins, but unfortunately they weren't able to get it done here in the playoffs. But still, you can see the development with this club, and hopefully next year, when things return to normal, they can continue on that steady path upwards. And lastly, just want to give another quick little update on the SLU soccer programs. First off, SLU men's soccer lost their second consecutive 1-0 double overtime decision. This time it was versus Dayton last Sunday. They still have 2 home fixtures left on their schedule before they get to the A10 tournament. They'll be taking on St. Bonaventure and Duquesne. On the women's side, SLU soccer went a perfect 4-for-4 in the first half of their conference schedule, which was punctuated by a 4-0 blowout over St. Bonaventure. They look really good, again, at the top of the A10 conference. Both clubs shouldn't have any problems qualifying for the A10 tournament. I'll be excited to see how far they can go into that and hopefully push for an NCAA tournament bid. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my interview last week with Houston-forward Shea Groom. If you haven't, I would encourage you all to go check that out. For this week's guest, I brought in another local soccer player who's in the middle of her recovery as she prepares for the upcoming NWSL season. Hope you enjoy. Well, I'm honored to be joined by today a member of the Chicago Red Stars who will begin their 2021 NWSL season in less than 2 weeks' time. The pride of Fort Zumwalt West High School, Alyssa Mautz. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh.
Well, I just want to check in. Obviously, we're less than 2 weeks away. I'm sure you guys are very excited for the start of the season. It's been a very long off season, obviously, with all that's been going on. Take me through how the team has looked so far in the preseason.
I think we've had probably the strongest preseason yet so far. The depth of the team is pretty good. We've never had so many people fighting for the starting spot. Kind of, that challenge and intensity each level, each day. It's been pretty intense, but good to see other people fighting for spots that normally don't. Just because of our team's pretty stacked right now, which is not a bad thing to have, is always a good thing. But yeah, it's just been a long preseason and just taking day by day. And I feel even just it's been long, it hasn't been long. We have our first game in 2 weeks, so it's gone pretty fast though.
And of course, I'm sure Red Star fans and fans back home here in St. Louis are excited for you to get back into the mix because obviously, it's been a tough past couple of seasons. You're coming off your second ACL tear that kept you out of 2020. Just want to ask you personally how you've been going. How's the recovery been going?
The recovery's been going pretty well. ACL has been feeling great. That process has been going awesome. And then people may not know, I did a second surgery on the same leg with my Achilles. And so that's kind of been holding me back. Like I started doing preseason, was doing well. And then last week kind of had a little setback with my foot. Still trying to stay positive with it and high hopes. But it's definitely taking longer than I thought. But everything's going pretty well. Like all the doctors say I'm doing great. So shouldn't be upset or, defeated from it. So that's always good to hear.
For sure. Hopefully, again, you'll be able to overcome those difficulties and feature at some point this season. But I wanted to ask you get your perspective on this, because I think when people hear about athletes having a similar type of injury again, they think, oh, well, they kind of know what the process is like. The recovery should be fine. You've talked a little bit in a couple of other interviews about the challenges that you've faced during this recovery process. And I want to ask you, is that a lot to do with the pandemic? How much does that kind of put a lot of struggles in your way and things that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, this second one was definitely different and challenging in its own way. I think it was more mentally struggled as well, more than physically at times. But I think just the challenges that I've overcome so far, it's only going to make me stronger. And I mean, any athlete that has gone through an injury and come back, it's the best feeling ever. And I literally can't wait for that feeling, just to step on that field again and with my teammates. And that's all I can, keep striving for and keep working at, just to get back out there. And that's my motivation. And just to prove to people that you can do it too. You'll have those setbacks, but it's only going to make you stronger and you can overcome them.
So I actually want to kind of ask you to expand upon that just a little bit, because I know that there are athletes at varying levels of not just soccer, of course, but all sports who have had to go through, long recovery processes. And obviously during this pandemic, you're having to deal with a bunch of different things. Are there any other additional lessons that you learned through this recovery, or just anything that was reaffirmed during this process that you would like to pass on to other athletes going through a similar situation?
Yeah, I think for me, it was always it's your journey. You have to take in charge of it. Don't rush into things. Don't let people rush you to doing stuff. I felt I wasn't a part of the team and going to trainings as much, just because mentally I wasn't ready. And that was okay. I think athletes think that they need to be there if they're not playing, or just to be there. And if you're not there mentally and you're just not helping the team in any way, I don't think it's a way to put yourself in that situation. I mean, other than that, I feel I've learned so much about my body, and I think if you're not feeling right, don't do it. Listen to your body, because you're the only one that knows how it feels. But yeah, and just taking your time, being patient. Being patient is probably the key word for me, because I'm always can I do this? Can I do that? Oh, you told me I could do this, and then I do it too much, so just be patient. The time will come.
Well, I really appreciate your perspective on that. So let's move to some more positive news. The Red Stars are one of the most historic franchises, in America, in all of soccer. And you are actually the longest tenured member of the Red Stars on this roster. And I think that's amazing, because if you look at the NWSL as a whole over the past few seasons, there's been a lot of turnover at the top, a lot of big-time players making moves. You've been the constant standard here at the Red Stars. I want to ask, with that type of perspective, knowing how much turnover there is in the league, what does that mark of consistency mean to you?
I mean, I am very thankful for it, because I know what to expect here. I know how the club works. So it's always a comfort to come back. So it's a second home to me. So I feel that helps out a lot. And just knowing the relationships with everybody in the club, I'm pretty close to the owner now, and obviously the coaching staff, don't have any issues speaking to them and saying my opinion if something's wrong. And I've seen the club go from, to being in a locker room underground to now we're at the stadium at SeatGeek. So like I'm seeing the growth of the club as well. So I think that process has been like the coolest to see. And rookies coming in, they just don't even know like how it all started. And I've been through it all. So I feel like it's good to have that and just like being thankful and like, showing them how far we have come, really.
Well, speaking of growth at the club, we've seen a trend lately of some type of big name athletes or big name celebrities attaching themselves to NWSL clubs. We saw Naomi Osaka with North Carolina. We've seen the group with Angel City FC. Well, the Red Stars got in on the action here just at the beginning of this month with an announcement of a revamped ownership group with several high-profile investors. Just want to ask you about what are you excited about the most, and what do you think that those people will help bring to the club?
I mean, just to have that many owners like being there to support us, I think it's great. And the excitement around it, I think it was very exciting for all of us. I think we're kind of waiting to see how much they're gonna, come up with and help us through stuff. So I think that can only make us and the club stronger and, better. But I mean, I only particularly know Sarah Spain, so she's super funny. Like, I think she's great to have on board, outgoing. So she's already like said some things that I'm like, oh, really? Like yellow card kind of bets going on. But I think it's fun to have, and like it just brings different things to the table and like other resources for us, really.
Well, it's really cool to hear that Sarah's, as funny and awesome as she is in person as she is on TV and on radio. That's really cool to hear. Obviously, I know you're Chicago Red Stars through and through, but I'm going to ask you to put your St. Louis cap on for just a moment. And I'm sure you've been aware of everything that's been going on with the new MLS club here in St. Louis and the female majority owned ownership group of St. Louis City SC. Of course, St. Louis has a proud tradition of producing and supporting women's soccer. So, of course, when the announcement came, and, of course, everything since, there's been as much mutterings about when St. Louis is going to get an NWSL team. I just want to ask you from your perspective, if that were ever to come to pass, what would St. Louis having an NWSL team mean for the league?
I've always thought St. Louis was such a good like soccer city. Always had great support. I think it would be a huge, step forward for the city. And I mean, it would be an honor, I think, to have that team there. I mean, I've always had great experiences whenever I come back and play in the city where I was born. So, I mean, it would be huge. And I mean, I would love it.
For sure. All right, so let's look ahead to the beginning of this season. Now, I'm sure that you've heard this plenty of times. You've been asked this plenty of times, but it obviously has got to be tough. You guys are coming off of a 2019 NWSL Championship final appearance, and then last year with the Challenge Cup, you were also runners-up there. So it's obviously got to be tough. So I'm sure there's plenty of frustration there. Is there any positivity that you could take away that you're basically almost to your goal, or is this, is this season basically about erasing all of that and finally crossing the finish line?
I mean, I think both those losses are still hurting us a little, and we want to, get it back. And I think it's driving us more and more. I mean, we've finally come across that semis where we had, the 4 years or whatever, we were stuck at the semis. So I think we're just getting more and more experience, and, we've been there now. So it's like, okay, now what can we do with that? Like, we've been here. It shouldn't be anything new. Like, we can do this. So I think we'll have a little bit more confidence in that final game, which I think is better for us. And I think we'll have more of a bite.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to make a statement early on since the first match is a rematch versus Houston. Now, obviously, both rosters will be loaded. Not sure in terms of U.S. Women's National Team call-ups what things will look, but you've talked about it. Your roster's loaded once again. It's going to be the first game, though, obviously, and there's all the the protocols and things like that that go with the first game. So what are kind of your expectations of how that's going to play out?
I think the first game's going to be a little chaotic, a lot of excitement. That typical first game where it may not look as organized, but it's going to be a fight. Both teams love to, be gritty. So I'm looking forward to that. And I mean, I just think it's overall going to be a great game and exciting. Probably some goals, both sides. You never know. Just because the first game and playing in Houston, like we've always had a crazy game in Houston, I feel like. So it's honestly a toss up, but I think we've done our job and the hard work in preseason that we should come up top.
All right, Alyssa, I'll get you out of here on this then. Obviously, we're still working our way back through things with the pandemic. We're working our way towards having fans back. I'm sure it's been a long off season, obviously, for you guys, and hopefully, we continue to push forward and getting more fans in attendance. Is there a message you'd like to, shout out to the supporters, basically about this upcoming season, what you're hoping for, and I guess any type of appreciation that you've had for them during this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just love to see more people coming out to support us. Obviously, women can, really fight harder than the men. We're always fun and, exciting to play. So, I mean, in all, we love the support that we're getting now. It's growing and growing, which is great. We love to see that. I mean, I think we're all just looking forward just to see fans and a little bit of a normalcy, other than just our teammates on the sideline, and a little more noise would be nice. But yeah, we're just looking forward to seeing all the supporters again, and we know they're eager. So just as long as it's safe, I think we'll be really excited to see it all come together.
Well, I know the league has grown astronomically over the years, and obviously if you can't get out to the matches, you can obviously stream it online. Paramount Plus, couple weeks time, April 9th, Chicago Red Stars taking on the Houston Dash in the opener of the 2021 NWSL Challenge Cup. Alyssa, very excited for you. Hope to see you back out on the pitch soon, and good luck this season. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
My thanks to Alyssa for joining me on the show. That'll do it for this episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're looking for more content on what's going on with U.S. soccer, I would encourage you all to check out the Atletico TV Facebook page and check out our latest episode. Enjoy the soccer this weekend. Champions League action returns next week, and I'll be back to break it all down for you with a brand new episode next week. Thank you all for watching. Have a great weekend.